So you have this state of being that you're in. I've talked about it in the past and whatever. The state of being that you're in where you're constantly restless. You're constantly restless, and not only are they restless, but they're very cold and unforgiving. When I say they, I mean like the big mega corporations that monopolized everything, like Big Rock, the Rockefeller family, and all the other families and bloodlines like that. So they're very cold and unforgiving in that way. So even when you are in this restless state, you know, it's not exactly acknowledged. You know, it's kind of like a you problem. Like you got something that you have to fix. You got something that you have to figure out and sort out. But none of the blame, and you'll notice this too, none of the blame is ever passed over onto the big mega corporations that monopolized everything of BlackRock, the Rockefellers, Vanguard, all that stuff. It's always just you know, you just kind of take it out on the person closest to you, because it's easier that way. It's easier to take it out on your neighbor, because your neighbor's right there. Whereas BlackRock, Rockefeller, who else? There's a whole bunch of other like families like that kind of own everything, or own a large majority of everything. You know, but man, the blame's never shifted on them. You know, the blame is never shifted on them, not even in news outlets. It's always going on like a individual basis. Like, oh, it's like just this guy. Like when the Epstein files came out, you know, and I think it was, I think it was like Prince Andrew, or it was Prince something from like the UK. And it was basically like rubbing his nose in all of his guilt. Like that was his form of punishment, you know. And it's like they use one person as a scapegoat for everything, rather than acknowledging that, man, they're all kind of in on it in a way, you know. And I know it doesn't really do a whole lot of good to harp on the negative, harp on the bad. But I think it does do some good and some justice to realize and to acknowledge that the way how they're playing this is very deceitful. You know, it's not exactly the full truth. It's only a partial truth. Like, yeah, Prince Andrew, you know, rubbed his nose into like literally freaking child sacrificing and doing stuff with children. And what the hell? You get squirrels dropping acorns and crap. You know, and you know, Prince Andrew didn't really receive any backlash, you know, and he did receive a lot of backlash, but he didn't really receive any just punishment for the crimes that he's committed against humanity. You know, and you see this with, you know, Sean Diddy Combs. You know, everyone would like to preach, well, there just wasn't enough evidence for Sean to be locked away more than 5 years. Dude, there is a lot of witnesses, you know, and yeah, you know, you can deny and maybe say it's irrelevant if you have only like a handful of witnesses. But man, when there is just countless and there is just an innumerable amount of witnesses, and they're describing each other's testimony to a T, it becomes a lot harder to just brush it off like it's nothing. You know, just like in the Bible, you know, like that's kind of the evidence that we have to go off of from the Bible, is the testimonial evidence of, you know, the disciples that were closest to him. You know, and not only that, we have to see if their testimonies match up to some degree. You know, even the people that weren't exactly close with one another. You know, and that's something that I don't think a lot of people are willing to acknowledge in the Sean Diddy Combs case. And now there's a lot of conspiracy theories that like Epstein isn't really, smells like weed, that Epstein isn't really dead. You know, there's like for the longest time, there was a saying going around on the internet that Epstein didn't kill himself. Epstein didn't kill himself, you know? Like we had that footage that came out not all too long ago of the prison footage, you know, and very conveniently there was one specific minute that was just cut out from the prison footage, and like everyone's asking, well, where is it? Where is it? They said like, oh, it's just like a malfunction in the camera system. Enough pressure onto them, magically it appears. Same thing with the Epstein files. Same thing with the Epstein files. It was magically, you know, it's no big deal. I don't know why anyone would even want to see this stuff. It's really boring. You know, is what Mr. Trump said. But man, it ended up being a lot. It ended up being a crap ton. You know, it ended up being like not a whole lot. It's really boring stuff. To boom, 6 million files dropped on everybody, you know? And it's really not as bad. It was actually a lot worse than I thought. I thought, and I say just very lightly, but I thought it was just, you know, like child stuff, you know, stuff with children, like where they're doing like sexually immoral stuff with children. But I didn't know to the extent of how evil someone can actually be, you know, and how the extent that someone can actually be evil is far beyond what I could ever even imagine, you know. And after going through those files, you know, it left me in a really dark spot where I just wanted to find the nearest person next to me and like punch them, you know, instead of, because like it's like they're so high up in their throne and in their palace and their kingdom and their place, you know. It seems so, it almost would seem unjust for like me to go after them when they deserve such punishment that is beyond what I can deliver to them. You know, it's like instead of me or even like a group of people, even a nation of people delivering punishment onto people like that, it's really a punishment that God has to inflict in eternal damnation. But anyways, but yeah, with that being said, you have the Epstein stuff, you have the Sean Diddy Combs stuff, you know, you have the stuff that came out with like Pizzagate in the Epstein files. Everyone says it's a conspiracy theory, and it always is a conspiracy theory until it's not. You know, it's not that you're not right, it's just that you're not right now. You know, and man, that is bars, you know. But anyway, I think that's all I got to talk about. Anyways, God bless.